Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending. Looking forward to showing you the budgeting planning module of Sage Intacct. Our quick agenda, just a refresher of who Alliance is, a little bit about Sage Intacct, and then we'll get into the budgeting and planning module. My background, I have been was a controller formerly for a mechanical contractor, and I focus on the construction, service, and manufacturing divisions, and I work with a lot of the different products, Sage Intacct, Sage 300, Sage 100, so very familiar with accounting solutions. Here at Alliance, we are, our vision is to be the premier provider of technology solutions for the construction industry. We work with a lot of the different premier products out there in the marketplace. A lot of you that are here on Sage 300 or Sage 100, and some of you may be considering looking at Sage Intacct. And then what is Sage Intacct? So a little bit of history of Sage construction. We all sort of started back in the day with Timberline. Timberline was a job cost accounting solution that was acquired by Sage in the early 2000s. They also acquired Sage 100 Contractor, and this really formed our construction division within Sage. A couple of years ago, they acquired Sage Intacct, and now they've begun to add functionality to Sage Intacct for the construction space. This is now where Sage is looking to move customers into the cloud. So a lot of customers have been wanting to move to the cloud, and Sage Intacct Construction is Sage's answer for that. So what is Sage Intacct for construction? It's made up of a lot of different modules, a lot of the traditional ones that you are currently using in some of the other systems, accounts payable, job costing, cash management. And then the main module we'll be focusing and talking about today is this budgeting and planning module. So Sage Intacct's budgeting and planning module is a web-based budgeting and planning application. Now, so many times when people are doing budgeting, a lot of times this is how they're budgeting. They're budgeting in Excel. They have meetings where they meet about the budget. They share budgets via Excel, email those budgets around. It's a lot of pain about, am I in the most current version of the budget? Then they're having to import that budget back into their software or rekey that budget into their software. And when working with your data, typically you're working with very detailed data that's coming out of your accounting software, accounts, maybe departmental information, maybe different company information. But then typically when you're beginning to do your budgeting and planning, it's a more summarized version of that same data. You're maybe not focusing on all the different granular cost of sales accounts or all of the different types of revenue. Maybe it's just more general revenue and costs, operational costs. Maybe we're not focused on a particular location. We're looking at all locations together. And trying to marry those two pieces of data together, my actuals with my budget, can be very time consuming, and yet again another Excel spreadsheet of having to compare those, and again pulling in the latest information, hoping I've got the right version of it. Just a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of work, and room for error as well. Now, what if I could have a system that would allow me to run different multiple what-if scenarios in seconds? Or I could budget and plan by company or entity in minutes, pulling together those different entities that I manage in the system. Create rolling forecasts. And also know who updated the budget and when. So if there's changes, I'm not having to try to figure out who's got the latest and greatest version and who made those changes. Now, how can we do all of this? Well, we can do all of that in Sage budgeting and planning, and actually a lot more. Now, with traditional basic budgeting, typically it's prepared in Excel, and then you manually import that budget. And with Sage Intacct core product, we have that functionality. I can prepare a budget in Excel. I can import that budget. So it's a constant, again, maintaining in Excel and importing that data. But with the budgeting and planning module that we'll see, we're going to be able to create a budget. We can share it. We can compare. We can do forecasts. We can do what-if scenarios, have a new budget. We can keep the cycle continuously planning and reviewing our budget year long. And then when we're ready to, send that budget into Sage Intacct for use. So now we're going to be able to deploy our budget in days, not weeks. Because once I set up a budget template, build out my expenses, import any actuals, I can start doing planning, share the budget, get any questions answered, and then produce the budget. And all of this is through our seamless bi-directional data flow. So if I'm budgeting by department or budgeting by a location or by a company, I can budget that granular and it'll pass that information into Sage Intacct. And I can pull actuals out of Intacct into the budgeting and planning module. So let's go take a look at the budgeting and planning module. Sage Intacct budgeting and planning software is completely cloud-based. I'm logged in through the cloud, so I can control who has access to the module as well as the security. There's different levels of users. There's a complete full admin user that can do everything. There's view-only users that maybe want to look at budgets. There's also contributors who you may share a portion of the budget or all of the budget with, and they can make contributions to revising their share of the budget. So there's different level of users that you can purchase and distribute to your company employees. So I start off when I come into this product in a dashboard view. I can build additional widgets that pull in information from not only the budget, but also potentially actual. So if I wanted to look at maybe actual versus budget right here on this dashboard view, I can. It's pulling in information that I'm maybe storing, like head count, new hires I'm planning for. I can see charts and graphs of my data that's in the budgeting module. I also have these filters across the top. So if I'm focusing on a specific department, I could filter this dashboard to that specific department, as well as location. Location could be a company or it could be a division within your company as well. Now moving into my sheets, this is where I'm going to begin to start to see some of the data that I've imported or data I've built out. Again, I have these filters, and we're going to come back to this because we can build onto these filters and that we can add in things like scenarios or forecasts that we can view. So again, if I wanted to filter by a particular department or location, I can do that with just the click of a button. Maybe I just want to see the New York location. It's changed my budget just that quickly by selecting that filter. I also have what's called models. So I can begin to build out different models as well. Maybe I'm anticipating some staffing changes. Maybe I'm anticipating a large project that I'm going to get that's going to impact my business in a lot of different ways. Or maybe I'm worried about, continued to be worried about COVID and what impacts that could have in my business. I can layer in these different scenarios and see how it affects what I'm projecting. And then I can do comparisons again of what looking at my normal budget would look like versus what introducing these different scenarios would look like. These are things that I can, of course, do in Excel, but sharing and maintaining an audit trail of the changes to it can be very challenging at times. And being able to pull it into a system like Intacct's budgeting and planning can keep everybody synced in and contributing. Now, where all this information comes from is our inputs. So from my input screen, I can start with building in I can pull in my budget. So I can come in here and import in a new budget. So I can import a budget in I can base it off of a prior year or a prior budget. I can add increases. I can walk through and answer questions about, do I want it to be summarized? Do I want to bring over all the detailed accounts, or am I looking for more a high level? And then I can label that budget. Now, in the input screen, I can then begin to work through all the information that I've initially imported in. So I'm looking at revenue right here. So now I see the details of my revenue, what I'm planning for each month. Now, how do I want to book that revenue? Is it based on it's a monthly number? Is it quarterly? Is it yearly? Is it just a one-time thing? Do I have a one-time cost coming up that I want to record in a particular month? What is the amount of it? And then how am I going to spread it? Is it going to be something that's evenly spread throughout each month? Is it different each month and then I could plug in the actual numbers? Or do I want to plan for some growth throughout the year? Is it going to grow? And I put in a 5% growth so I see that I've got that growth throughout the year. Now, this is where we begin to introduce the dimensions. And if you're not familiar with what a dimension in Sage Intacct, it's really a category. Dimensions are things like departments, locations, companies. They could be projects. And so now if I want to get more granular, I may want to say, well, I want to budget for a particular department, or I'm looking to budget for that New York location, and I want to build out that particular location's budget. Every time I add in these things, I can choose to save it now or it will auto save for me. So it's constantly keeping up with the budget as well as maintaining a history. So if you see, as I've made changes, it's been auto saving all along. So if I did realize, you know, 4 or 5 minutes or an hour later that I want to go back to a prior revision because I made a mistake, I can go back to a prior version. So once I've gone through and made my, added in my inputs, if I need to make changes to it based, because when I originally imported it, I may have projected out my budget just based on the prior year and I'm happy with that. Then I may just want to tweak specific items. Now down here in the operational, I can choose to bring in all of my employees. Now where that comes from is from a table that maybe I want to build out a little bit more data. For example, I want to see all of my employees. So I can pull in all of my employees with information. Because maybe if I've got some employees that are getting ready to retire, or maybe they have annual pay increases, and I want to record what that increase is and when does it happen. So I'm pulling that information in because maybe every year I give my employees a 2% increase on their work anniversary. Then I could build that into the projections for the upcoming year. Now, as I'm performing these inputs into my budget, I may want to share some of this information. Right now, when we're sharing that in Excel, if it's sensitive information like that salary information, that I may not want to share that with somebody. So again, I'm left with maybe exporting a section of an Excel spreadsheet out to another Excel spreadsheet for someone to review, and then me to bring in that modified portion that maybe that user had changed the format. So now I'm having to reformat it back to my original format, just making it very time consuming and difficult. But here with budgeting and planning, I can choose to share this budget with individuals, and I can choose what I want to share. So maybe I just want to share revenue. I want a manager just to review my revenue. I don't want them to see all the salary detail. So I can come into revenue and say, I just want to share that. And when I go into share, I can say, well, what can that employee do that I'm sharing with? Can they modify or can they just view? And then they're restricted to just viewing that little section of the budget. If I've given them the option to modify, they're making their modifications back to my original budget. It's almost like one of those Google Share spreadsheets. So their changes are directly impacting and revising my budget that I can then see and review. So I can choose to share just a segment of my budget, or I can choose to share the entire budget with a colleague. Now, once I've built in my data, once I've shared this information with my colleagues so that they can make changes and revisions, I may choose to create some different models or scenarios. And so I can model in different situations. So staffing changes. Maybe I've got a big project I'm planning for, and it's going to add some staff count. I can give it a description. I can add in multiple line items like I've done here and tell it what is it impacting. Maybe it's going to increase salary this much a month. But we're going to add some trucks. It's going to also increase this line item. Or maybe I've got that COVID example. I can build in different types of scenarios that I can then layer into my budget. So now, once I come back into my scenario and pick one of these scenarios, now that scenario is available. Maybe it was cutting back travel when I have COVID. We're not going to be traveling, so I'm taking that out of my budget. And when I come back and look at my sheets, I can bring in that change into this filter. So here, this is that view that we looked at in the beginning. I can now incorporate that scenario into my view. Say I just want to look at the COVID view, or maybe I want to look at it compared to my working budget, and I can see the differences of the scenario versus my working and how it's impacting my budget with that scenario. Again, I was able to do that so easily by building out the scenario, which really sits there independently for me to review, and then letting it be incorporated in and be able to do the comparison. Now, if I am making changes to my budget, I do have the option of coming in here and saying, well, what if our bookings were going to look a little different? Maybe we are anticipating, a more additional bump in growth. Maybe it's going to bump up to 605,000 starting monthly. I can plug that information in, and I can come up here to my history. Let me get out of this real quick here. My history. Oh, looks like it there. Bump this back up here, 605, and come here to my history, and we saw that it was auto saving, but I also have the option of taking a snapshot, and maybe we'll call this forecast one, and I can capture this as a forecast. I could add in a comment, and now I've built just a quick forecast. See that there? Now, when I come back to these sheets, I may choose to pull in some of that forecasting information. So if I come in here, I may want to say, I just want to look at the working budget, or I also want to look at just my forecast. So here I could bring in what that forecast looks like. And I've got some different forecasts. I had a downside forecast. Here I have a forecast one. Maybe I want to compare that against my actual. I have a lot of flexibility with using those forecasts that I've saved, and I could have, multiple different forecasts that I run throughout the year and begin to look at that. And then I can even build, as you saw, a waterfall report with all of my different forecasts built in. So we basically have taken that simple Excel spreadsheet that a lot of us budget from and has worked so well for us, but can be very time consuming and sometimes difficult to work with sharing it, making sure we have the right version of it. And we've given you so much functionality that you probably are trying to do with Excel, or maybe want to do but can't do with Excel, but building it into a tool that's very flexible, that can be shared with other users by sharing it as a read-only view or even as a contributor. And then being able to run reports and filter the data, compare your different scenarios you've built out or models that you've created for the company, looking at forecasts that maybe you've built, if that's increases or decreases to your budget. And then once you've compared all that, then you can sync this data back with your Sage Intacct. Once this budget's been finalized by everybody, we can say, okay, let's send that budget over to Intacct, and now it becomes the budget that we manage the company by. So this has been a short overview of Sage Intacct's budgeting and planning. We wanted to introduce you to the module and the system that we find to be very powerful for the construction user. I will give us, I know we had talked about having some time at the end to be able to answer questions. I wanted to leave a few minutes to do that if there are any questions from this review.